one of the big questions that's come out is whether Genesis was offering uncollateralized loans to large investors on the understanding that they would then buy GBTC. Are you aware of this?
I am not privy to the loans that are going on or that were going on at Genesis. What I certainly can confirm is that when investors were making investments into Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, they were doing it either by investing cash, in which case that cash would go out and buy the right amount of Bitcoin. Sometimes they were investing with Bitcoin, and that was adding up to a certain number of shares. Or in other instances, they might have been borrowing Bitcoin to be able to add some leverage into the trade that they were doing. And sometimes those loans could have come from Genesis, but they also could have come from loans that they obtained elsewhere. The actual collateral requirements that an investor had to make a borrow is not something that we would know.
But you are aware that Genesis customers were buying GBTC?
Certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about the Genesis business, it was and largely still is, the Genesis trading side of things, spot trading, derivatives. I mean, they were a industry stalwart that, almost every institutional and high net worth partner was using for some kind of, crypto related service as they built out their prime broker offering.
Because these loans businesses, typically, they don't tend to do uncollateralized loans because it's such high risk.
Sure.
And so I'm wondering, what is the incentive for Genesis to be taking such high risk offering uncollateralized loans if it's done on the condition that they have to use that to buy GBTC, which kind of becomes a money printer for them to then go out and take other loans. Somebody has to be incentive. There has to be incentive in there somewhere. So I don't believe the incentives with Genesis. There's certainly a great incentive for Grayscale because you sell more of the shares. So I try and understand who is structuring those deals. Is it Barry and he's instructing people to do this? Because there has to be some kind of interrelationship group benefit and therefore intercompany discussion to make that happen.
So the Genesis business has and was an authorized participant for the Grayscale products. Today, Grayscale, with its own broker-dealer, is the authorized participants for its products. It's one of the things we worked on over the last couple of years. And so, like any authorized participant, they're, of course, going to make a fee when they create shares of a product. It's true of an ETF, and it's certainly true here. But there was no, and never has been, any kind of arrangement that if, someone was borrowing, that there would be some kind of other way to incentivize or compensate somebody for making that loan if it was for GBTC or a Grayscale product.
So you're saying Genesis weren't offering uncollateralized loans as long as they bought GBTC?
I have no idea the collateral requirements that Genesis was asking of somebody if they were borrowing coins for GBTC is what I'm saying.
But I mean, you're aware of this now though.
I've heard about it, and we're talking about it today, that certain people were saying that the collateral requirements were either off market or were, atypical if they knew the proceeds were that. But I am not aware of what the collateral requirements were that somebody was dealing with. If they were taking a borrow from Genesis, they were dealing with someone at Genesis, not someone at Grayscale. We don't have a loan book. We don't loan.
No, I get all that, but you know who these customers are. You know who 3AC are. You know who these people are, and they would have been significant customers of Grayscale. So what kind of due diligence do you perform on these companies when they're making such significant purchases?
The absolute largest and most extensive due diligence we can do. AML, KYC, source of funds, government issued IDs, everything possible. I mean, we're selling a security. These are regulated investment instruments. But the things that you're touching on, which is around collateral requirements and things like that, that is within the scope of an arrangement made between borrower and lender, not between, the issuer and the investor.
But you were aware, so yeah, if 3AC are buying a significant amount of GBTC from you guys, you have to perform due diligence on them. They passed all due diligence checks?
Due diligence, absolutely. I mean, in terms of AML, KYC, source of funds, coins that are run through, Chainalysis or whatever the appropriate, blockchain forensic tools that are available now. That's the kind of work that's done when investors make an investment in a Grayscale product.
And so source of funds could have been Genesis.
Could have been Genesis, yes.
So is there not really a conflict of interest of the source of funds?
Why would there be a conflict of interest?
Because, Because if the fund isn't dirty, it isn't. No, I see what you're saying.
Well, no, I think here's what you're getting at, which is that if you're hedge fund XYZ and you want to borrow some Bitcoin to invest in a Grayscale product, well, you can go to Lending Desk 1 or Lending Desk 2.
Yeah.
And if Lending Desk 2 happens to be Genesis and they happen to be giving you a better borrow rate than Lending Desk 1, well, then you may want to make that borrow from Lending Desk 2, from Genesis, right? And so there's no conflict of interest there. I mean, it's up to the investor.
I tell you what it is. I tell you what I find hard to believe, and I don't expect you to give me the answer that I think I'm wanting here, but I find it very hard to believe that there's billions of loans being issued by Genesis, which is then being immediately used to purchase GBTC, and that you wouldn't be aware that this is a relationship and an offer that was made specific. I just find that really hard to believe.
Totally separate companies, totally separate businesses.
That the unifying factor is Barry. And I would find it very hard to believe that he doesn't talk to both CEOs to discuss this arrangement. I just find it very hard to believe. I mean, you've worked with Barry since 2000, whenever. I mean, it's the market. I would find that very hard to believe.
Barry is a visionary. Barry is an incredible investor. Barry is not an operator, right? Barry is not someone that is telling myself and the rest of the Grayscale management team what to do day to day, or really any of the operating subsidiaries. That's how and why Barry has amassed for DCG the largest and arguably most impressive venture capital portfolio in the crypto space, broadly speaking, right? And so,
at what cost to investors?
What do you mean?
Well, you said he's amassed the most impressive, but at what cost? Yeah, there's lots of people now, whether they're Gemini Earn customers or Genesis customers, who have no access to their funds.
DCG made investments in venture capital companies, in venture-backed companies, private companies, blockchain companies, crypto companies, in every continent. And I think it's over 200 companies, over 40 countries around the world, not using Gemini Earn deposits, using proceeds that Barry, the businesses made, being profitably run businesses, and or from the very limited amount of capital that DCG raised when DCG formed as a company.
That's only part of the story. Do you think it's ethical what's happened to Gemini Earn depositors and Genesis depositors, that they now have, facing the fact they have no access to their funds? This is a range of people that could be massive high net investors down to the little guy. Bear in mind, I've got Gemini as a sponsor. I've read the emails of people who've lost their funds, cannot access their funds.
No, it's exceedingly disheartening.
No, that's not the question I asked. I asked,
is it unethical? What part of it is unethical?
The Genesis were offering uncollateralized high-risk loans, which have now propped up the AUM of Grayscale.
I mean, Genesis extending loans that made their way into Grayscale products is one of numerous ways that the Genesis loan book was used.
You're avoiding the question, though. I'm saying
not at all.
Was it ethical?
I'm trying to ask, what is unethical?
I think it's unethical to offer loan, and it's a separate business.
Right.
I'm just asking you about the ethics.
That's what I'm saying. You're asking the wrong person. I didn't make the loans. Grayscale didn't make the loans. But I'm not guilty by association as a result of it.
Well, you're part of DCG. You're part of the group that allowed this to happen. So you are part of this. You may be part of Grayscale, but Grayscale's AUM is propped up by what I would say unethical behavior, potentially fraud. Okay, we can argue about whether it's unethical fraud, but it's certainly unethical what happened because people now do not have access to their funds. The loans that were issued, that are uncollateralized, to high-risk firms who didn't have the collateral and were therefore told if they could have these these highly valuable loans as long as they buy GBTC. That is unethical. But I would say that's unethical behavior. Would you say that's ethical?
I am not aware of someone who said you can have set loan if you do X or if you do Y.
Well, I'm aware, so I'm telling you. Do you think it's ethical?
Were you one of the people who took the loans?
Nope.
So then how are you aware?
I'm aware. I'm just, okay, look, hypothetically speaking.
Right? You know, you have to take a giant step back, right? Then you have to look at the Gemini Earn program, right? So Gemini Earn had X number of investors who were depositing to Gemini, click the Earn button to earn yield on their crypto.
Yep.
I flipped the question back to you. Was it prudent of Gemini to then, as a counterparty in the early stages of where crypto lending was and still arguably is today, was it prudent of them to put all of their customers' deposits for earning interest to a single counterparty?
I mean, I would ask Tyler and Cameron themselves if I was with them.
Right.
But they're not part of DCG.
But nonetheless, they're still the ones who extended that all into one place, right? And were they doing the proper due diligence on the way that Genesis was or wasn't making loans, right?
But that's a question for Tyler and Cameron and Gemini. It's not a question for DCG. The question is, you're part of DCG.
I'm really responsible for running the Grayscale business, right?
Of course, but you're part of DCG.
So I can share in the frustration, I can share in the anger, I can share in the saddened state that we are in because people have been disadvantaged, have had, you know, millions of dollars of capital that's been tied up in these types of arrangements because the Genesis loan book shut down, because Genesis went into Chapter 11. But I also can't claim or take responsibility for it running the Grayscale business, right?
I've not asked you to take responsibility.
And I also can't really opine in a sincere way whether things were ethical, unethical, untoward, or toward, because
I think you have a duty to, because you've talked early on about the size of the AUM.
Yep.
We know the fees, the high fees that you guys charge, the 2%, leads to a massive amount of revenue a year for the company. Now, if the AUM has been propped up by unethical behavior by another company within the same group, with specific arrangements that have pushed people towards buying more of this, that have essentially taken the funds of retail and other institutional investors from Gemini Earn and Genesis, and that has pushed up the AUM, the revenue that your company has earned and the wages that pay you has come from unethical behavior, potentially fraud. The money you earn has come from that because the AUM you've earned, the commissions on the AUM you earn comes from the money of Gemini customers and Genesis customers.
That's a mischaracterization.
I mean, it just isn't. It's factually true.
It absolutely is a mischaracterization. You cannot extrapolate an arrangement that was made between Gemini and Genesis to deal between the two of them and the resulting losses that have come from that arrangement being something that we at Grayscale are somehow responsible for. It's a bridge too far.
I didn't say you were responsible for.
Or that our, what did you say? Our wages are earned unethically?
I said, how do you feel about the ethics of this? How do you feel about the ethics? You're part of the same group. You are part of DCG. DCG is run by Barry, who runs most of these companies. There are intercompany relationships. Part of your AUM has come from the misappropriation of Gemini customers' funds and the misappropriation of Genesis customer funds. That money has gone into Grayscale and bought Grayscale shares. Therefore, the money you make on top from your commission has come from that. So these people who do not have access to their funds, they've lost money because of the unethical, potentially fraudulent behavior of Genesis. How that can't affect you is beyond me.
Of course it affects me.
But is it ethical, what happened?
It's not a question of ethics, though.
Okay, then was it fraud?
It's not a question of fraud. I can't be responsible, and I'm not responsible for what has taken place at Genesis. Any of the customers who became Grayscale clients as a result of taking a loan from Genesis, if those clients are no longer actively in business or have shut down their fund or whatever it may be, as a result of their misappropriation, of their risk management, of their counterparties, of the investments they made. And I'm sure that investing in a Grayscale product or taking a Genesis loan or whatever counterparty exposure they may have had may be one of a multitude of factors that ultimately led to their demise. So to take it as far as everything that's now transpiring between Genesis and Gemini is not something that
And Grayscale.
We're not party to this.
Okay. Let me put it a different way. What you know and what you're willing to say you know are probably two very different things.
They're
I'm
not.
long in the tooth. You have a PR person with you. This is a PR tour. You've got rehearsed lines. I get it.
I don't. We're having a conversation.
No,
Jeez.
I get it. I reckon there is a difference between what you know and what you're willing to say you know. But what I would say is any PR you have will not save your soul from what's happened to all these people. There are people, I've received their emails, they're heartbreaking.
I can't imagine how heartbreaking they are.
And some of their money is now in the Grayscale Trust.
Their money was, as I understand the way that Gemini Earn and Genesis worked, was that when you clicked an Earn button in Gemini...
about Genesis loans that were uncollateralized as well. We can't just always flip this back to Gemini.
I'm not. So you're trying to tell me that you think that somebody lent money from Gemini to Genesis and Genesis lent it into a Grayscale product?
I'm telling you, large loans that were offered uncollateralized went towards buying Grayscale shares, and then those Grayscale shares were then used to post as collateral elsewhere.
But how are you trying to say that somebody's Gemini Earn deposit made its way into a Grayscale product?
Because those funds were stored with Genesis, and then Genesis used those as part of their assets under management, and they used those to loan out.
So Genesis had an active loan book. Some deposits they took from Gemini, some deposits they took from other people, some credit they extended back to other people, some credit they to other people. But somehow, because they had an arrangement with Gemini and, I don't know, hundreds of other counterparties to loan and borrow from.
It's very complicated, I'm sure.
Well, they did. They were the largest loan book in the crypto space,
and
right?
All these things, they're very complicated. The tentacles go everywhere.
Right.
But so Genesis is intrinsically linked to Grayscale. Intrinsically linked through being in the group, through Barry, through the arrangements that were offered to people who offered large uncollateralized loans. Those large uncollateralized loans ended up in the Grayscale Trust. Therefore, the AUM you have and the interest being earned has come from that unethical behavior.
Okay, well, I'll tell you again what I said earlier, which is that I am, and we are at Grayscale, not aware of special arrangements that were given to customers that borrowed from Genesis that were using those borrows to invest in Grayscale products. The terms that Genesis offered to their counterparties was terms that were offered between Genesis and that counterparty. Grayscale is not in the lending business. We didn't give them special compensation for making those loans or anything of the sort.
I don't believe you. I just have to be honest. I don't believe you.
Are you looking at the whites of my eyes?
I don't believe you.
Okay.
And I don't believe you at all. And I know there's no chance you're going to come here and admit it. I just wanted to see you say it, but I don't believe you.
You know, we're sitting here on a lovely Friday afternoon having a beer. You've asked me a ton of questions. I have given you an honest and wholesome answer to every single thing you've asked of me. So I'm disappointed to hear that you don't believe me.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I don't. Because do you know what? I just don't like. You've talked about how much you've been at the company longer than anyone else. You are essentially the number one employee. You've been the managing director. You've been the CEO. You've worked with Barry for over a decade. You know this business better than anyone else. You said you know the customers, you understand the sales, you understand the account management. Even the largest customers will still have a relationship with you. You also had said you have intercompany relationships. You know the CEOs of the other companies, but you didn't know this. So if you didn't know this, I would say either you're lying or you're incompetent, but you should have known.
Wow.
I just feel like you should. If you're the CEO of this company and you have interrelationships with companies like Genesis, you should know this. And because of this, there's been very severe consequences for a range of people. People's lives have been destroyed.
So you sound like you're on a little bit of a fishing expedition. I again reiterate to you, everything I've shared with you is wholesome and truthful. And again, I'm disappointed that my answers aren't satisfactory to you.
Yeah, well, we're not here to be used as a PR tour.
This isn't a PR tour. We're just two guys having a conversation about Bitcoin on a Friday afternoon.
I mean, look, I hope your SEC lawsuit is successful. I really do. But I've always been truthful with people when I do this podcast. And somebody knew what was up. And this will come out in the courts itself. I mean, you may yourself face questioning yourself, face litigation yourself. Barry almost certainly will. And this will come out eventually, I'm sure of it. But I just don't believe you, and I'm really sorry. I don't mean to be a dick. I think it's better to tell you I don't believe you, because if you did know and you can do something about this, that's what I hope you do. I hope from this you would go and do something about it.
I have been working tirelessly to do what's right by investors. We operate with the
Which investors?
Grayscale investors, and we have built an organization that prides itself on doing what is right by investors, acting ethically, acting compliantly, and we will, again, continue to fight for our investors. That's what we're doing by suing our regulator that oversees every aspect of our business.
Well, I'll finish on one final point. You had a rallying cry for Bitcoiners, why Bitcoiners should care about this, why they should care about this lawsuit.
Did that resonate with you?
It did, but I would put it back to you that what's happened to Genesis customers and Gemini customers should be equally important to you. And you're part of DCG. You work with Barry. Whatever happened, however it happened, it was unethical and it's destroyed some people's lives. And I think you are somebody who can make a difference here. I don't know what you knew, or you're never going to admit it, but I think you have a duty to become part of something that fixes that for those people who've lost their money. Otherwise, why should anyone give a fuck about your lawsuit?
Because
the lawsuit isn't about your investors. It's about your company. It's about access to wider liquidity. Of course it is.
Okay, you know what? I would ask you to do this. For your next 10, 20, 100 podcasts, find another person in crypto who reputationally, who professionally is bold enough to sue the harshest and most hard-hitting regulator in the world. And
dude, you live in New York City.
No. Find someone else in crypto that is bold enough, that wants to do the right thing enough, that they're going to devote all of their energies, all of their time, all of everything their business is doing to suing the regulator that oversees every element of their business. But you're not going to find one.
That's not bravery. That's business. You're spending funds on litigation. I've been involved in litigation, personal litigation. Bravery is what I've seen when I've been to the border.
Peter, every other person who approaches this regulator ends up being the recipient of enforcement actions, fines, penalties, you name it.
It's not bravery.
I didn't say bravery.
Bold, brave, like whatever the terms like.
But Peter, we run a regulated business. We've always run a regulated business from day one. They oversee every element of the business. We file 10Ks, we file 10Qs, we file 8Ks. Every element of our business ends up getting disclosed to the investing public. We worked proactively with these people to develop full and fair disclosures for investors.
Because it's good for your business. Let's not
because
conflate
it's good. It's good for our business.
Yes.
And it's good for investors.
As a byproduct.
And it's good for the asset class. And yes, we are going to succeed in this lawsuit. And yes, to the point I made earlier, succeeding in this lawsuit is a good thing for Bitcoin. And that is what folks should know.
I think an ETF would be good for Bitcoin. I agree with that. And I wish you the best on the lawsuit. I really do. I think we can leave it at that.
Awesome. Good to chat.
Good to chat.